Senator, one of the things that was your big campaign item was jobs creation. I know you've only been in office for 4 months, but have you got your finger on a pulse for a solution in that area?
Well, again, to me, it starts with developing a credible plan for spending restraint, for restraining the size, scope, and cost of government. It's what's driving, or it's what's preventing the growth in government, the growth in our economy. If you think about it, we have stimulated this economy to the tune of over $4 trillion of government spending, or deficit spending, over the last 3 years. $4 trillion. If you take a look at what happened to growth rates in the economy this last quarter, 1.8%. You know, I talked about in the campaign the tale of two recoveries. You know, when Reagan, a very similarly deep recession. You know, Reagan, in his first 7 quarters, or I think actually 9 quarters, he was averaging 9%, 8%, 8%, 8% growth rates. You know, Obama, his top growth rate per quarter has been 5%, then it's dropped down to 3.6. That's 1.8%. It's an incredibly anemic recovery. And again, that's because they're using Keynesian economics. They're borrowing money that is scaring off investors. It's dramatically affecting the confidence of consumers and businesses that we need to spend and that we need to invest and create jobs. So to me, in terms of getting economic growth, and again, that is the primary thing we need in terms of solution to our economic problems, we have got to constrain government spending and debt. And until we have that credible plan, you know, I think we're going to have a very difficult time doing that.
Senator, you talked earlier about tax fairness, and you'd like to get rid of some of the corporate loopholes, I believe, on taxes, so that it was more fair. What was your reaction when you heard that General Electric paid no taxes, no income taxes whatsoever?
I guess the first reaction was crony capitalism. Yeah, I don't know the specifics, but I do know that Jeffrey Immelt, you know, the CEO of GE, has been very close to the Obama administration. They've gotten, I think, huge tax incentives for all the green energy that they're.
You think it's all a green energy kind of a thing, or is it
again,
for the other aspects?
I don't know. I don't know all the details of it, but you know, I'm not particularly pleased when I hear large corporations pay no tax. When I certainly know the business, you know, that I operated under an LLC, where basically I paid income taxes under individual rates. The income flowed directly, you know, to an individual. I paid full tax rates. Mm-hmm. So no, I'm not happy with that, those types of arrangements at all.
Senator, regarding the nominations of Mr. Butler and Ms. Norris, if the White House wants to work with you on the situation on the nominations, will you work with them if they want to work with you?
The nominations?
Mr. Butler and Ms. Norris?
Oh, no, I think those nominations died with the old Congress. So what ends up happening, you know, really by custom, is the two senators have a compact, you know, to develop a commission to put forward nominations for vacant judges. And that's the process we should be going through. And so I've had discussions with Senator Cole. I think we'll conclude those pretty quickly in terms of what the arrangement's going to be. We'll appoint a commission, and then that commission will take a look at providing nominations or putting forth nominations for President Obama to consider. That's the way it should. That's the way it should go. I mean, elections have consequences, and the fact that the Obama administration just, you know, dumped those nominations basically in my lap without really respecting the voters, not respecting the process. I mean, I consider those nominations dead.
With the oil price, kind of following up on Lee's question, would you specifically say that you would favor removing oil subsidies?
You'd have to take a look at which subsidies you're talking about. And I would want to take a look at what is the real effect. But some of these things that are called subsidies are really just timing differences in terms of when somebody can actually deduct a legitimate business expense. And those things will help spur exploration. They'll tend to lower the price of oil and gasoline. So I don't want to do something that's counterproductive. So to just paint a broad brush and call something oil subsidies, do away with it, that's just not an intelligent way of going about the, you know, finding a solution. So I would want to take a look at everything that somebody's calling an oil subsidy and see really what is it meant, why was it put in the tax code? Is it incentivizing drilling? Does it actually lend itself toward lowering the price of oil? Before you actually come to conclusion. But again, I would want to make sure it's equal treatment across the board, not special deals for individual companies or individual industries. Now, obviously, you can have special deals for individual industries because they're different.
Is this your first news conference back in the district since you were,
It might be. Time flies.
I mean, since I don't cover you every day in and day out, I wasn't certain, but didn't recall.
Yeah.
You don't think this is probably your first one since?
No, this would be the first one back in the district. I've been doing a lot of media. A lot of my time is spent obviously in
Yeah.
Washington, D.C. And I will say in terms of what I've been doing since being elected, every day I wake up going, how can I be effective?
Mm-hmm.
How can I have an impact on the out-of-control spending and debt situation in this country? And the process I've followed, I kind of go right back to my business background. It's about building relationships. It's about getting first-class individuals working with you. So the first thing I did is I hired staff. In Washington, D.C., again, I think I've got a wonderful state director here. Tony's done a great job of finding really good people to help us do what we need to do here. Then beyond that, I've been trying to build relationships both in the Senate. Senator Cole, had meetings with him. Other Democrats, Senator Lieberman is the head of the Homeland Security Committee. My fellow Republican senators, to develop those relationships so I can be effective.
Do you have a favorite candidate for the presidential race?
It's pretty early on that. I will say I do like the governor model. People who actually run something, been an executive. So there's a couple of governors out there in the race that I would support. But I think the whole primary process is an incredibly important process, and the process of campaigning, debating, answering questions of reporters will help flesh out who that candidate ought to be. And so I certainly need to see how the people that have expressed interest in running for president, how they perform within a campaign, and then I'll be able to make a better judgment.
Do you want to speak to the popularity of Donald Trump?
And his dropping the F-bomb yesterday in Las Vegas?
That's obviously totally inappropriate. I have a hard time believing he's a serious candidate.
What advice did Senator Feingold give you?
Yeah, we had a very good meeting in his Senate office. One thing he conveyed to me, it's absolutely true. He said, "You'll love this job because you'll be able to help so many people." And that story that I conveyed about helping a daughter obtain a cancer drug from the FDA, who was kind of limiting its availability, and then that not only benefited her father, but a bunch of other people here in Wisconsin. I know exactly what Senator Feingold was talking about now. And again, I'm not taking credit for that. That's credit to the people in the state office here that really did a great job of contacting the FDA and making that happen. So again, recognizing the fact that this is one of the two primary responsibilities of being the U.S. Senator from Wisconsin, helping citizens of Wisconsin navigate that federal bureaucracy. That was a very good piece. It wasn't really advice, but just a statement that Senator Feingold made to me, and it's come true. He was right about that.
One thing the Feingold always used to do was hold listening sessions in every county once a year.
I'm a business guy, so I'm trying to, what can I do to be really efficient? What we've done for the first 2 months is we've been holding the telephone town halls. We did that a couple times with the campaign. By doing that, just in the first 2 months, we contacted and we had 22,000 people on the phone for an hour. Each session was an hour, peppering me with questions, and I was answering the questions. After the first telephone town hall, we always leave the phones open, and they can call in if we didn't get to their question. And we had an elderly woman call in and say, I'm handicapped. Thank you for doing this. There's no way I could have gone to a town hall. So, I mean, that's, with as busy as I've been in Washington trying to, listen and learn as quickly as possible, get up to speed, that's been a very effective method. But again, as time progresses, I'm going to start, I'll be doing a whole lot of additional things, potentially town halls as well. I don't have any current plans to announce, but No, I fully intend to be engaged in the state for the full 6-year term.
How many did you say you've had? How many total?
We've done 2. We're doing those on
Two.
a monthly basis.
So you had one in, what, February, March?
Yeah, we did February, March, and one's probably coming up here. Was it March, April?
April and March.
But you haven't had a town hall, but then, and you said there's going to be a handout. What are you describing as the events that are going to be in?
Oh, the Saturdays? Those are just office hours.
Office
so
hours, you
people-
won't be there, but somebody.
Right, yeah,
Okay,
from
okay,
our staff
gotcha,
will be.
Gotcha,
Maybe
okay.
get to some one-on-ones.
Do you have any questions in your mind of where the president was born?
No, absolutely not.
Do you think that it was any sort of distraction, him doing the press conference? I know that he's recently announced he's running again and that he's not doing so hot in the polls. Do you think him bringing that up, him having the press conference himself, was any sort of distraction to some of the other stuff that's going on?
It's been laid to rest, it's done and over, and we absolutely should move on.
So what do you think, sorry to keep harping on the issue, but what do you think about Donald Trump bringing this issue up again after it's been a couple years?
Again, I'm not 100% sure that Donald Trump is really a serious candidate. I mean, he talked about running for president as a Democrat. He's kind of shifting his position on an awful lot of issues. Donald Trump is a wonderful marketer. And I kind of take a look at what he's trying to do here is maybe marketing his future ventures. So, again, I don't really take him seriously as a presidential candidate.
So you're glad-
I could be wrong, but that's just my own personal opinion.
So you're glad this issue was put to bed?
Yeah, I am. But because, again, as I spoke about earlier, this year we'll have a $1.65 trillion a year deficit, $1,650 billion worth. And we really are looking at bankrupting our nation. And we are committing intergenerational theft. We are spending money that our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, I don't know how far this goes in the future, are going to have to pay off. That's simply wrong. It's immoral. It's got to stop. That's why I stepped up the plate. That's what I'm trying to, that's what I'm trying to address in Washington.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you for your time.
Let me start by asking you this. The Senate Majority Leader, Senator Reid, says he wants to put the budget bill passed by the House up for a vote in the Senate. Would you support the bill championed by your Wisconsin colleague, Congressman Ryan, as it's written now?
Again, that's a huge assumption that's actually be brought up that way. Quite honestly, what I'd like to see first is the Senate take up the business of providing, voting on a hard spending cap and a constitutional limitation on spending. Because, I mean, again, as much as I appreciate what Paul Ryan's done, that's a one-year budget that a new Congress can do away with. So I want to establish those hard spending caps before I start voting for any type of budget that's going to lock in, still continued deficit spending. So again, that's nothing taken away of I think what is a really courageous effort by Paul Ryan.
There is a lot of talk about its potential impact on entitlement programs. What do you think the long-term approach to entitlement spending, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid should be?
I'll tell you what, according to Paul, federal spending on interest, retirement, and health programs will totally consume all federal revenue on average, the average intake as a percent of GDP by the year 2025. Okay? I think one of the best lines, again, comes from Paul. He said, to talk about this mythical program called Medicare 30 years in the future, it's just wrong because it won't exist if we don't provide structural reform. One thing I learned as I traveled around the state of Wisconsin last year, I would speak to young people, and unfortunately for me, young people to me is 45 and under. And I'd ask them, what do you think you're going to get from Social Security? To a person, they'd always answer, nothing. They had no expectations. Now that's simply unfair. But what it also tells me, I think there's a very receptive audience for real structural reform. So I'm really not afraid of addressing the issue if we address it honestly, if we can get by the demagoguery. I think that's what Paul Ryan's trying to do is lay something out. Now let's start discussing it. And again, I would really call on President Obama and the Democrats in the Senate to put aside the political demagoguery, come to the table, start working with us sincerely and in good faith. Because certainly this is one senator who would definitely work in good faith. And I really do believe there's, the Republican conference is just hungering for that kind of leadership. Because let's face it, you don't pass anything in this country without the president signing it, other than a constitutional amendment, which is we'll try and do that without him.
Well, so when you do talk to younger people, and they're getting older to me also, but what do you think they should expect when it comes to, you know, they're working today? What should they expect from their older age, whether it be pensions or the ability of their ability to be taken care of in medical terms?
Well, right now, if we don't structurally reform these things, there will be nothing there for them. And their tax rates will be so astronomically high that you know, there really is a crushing burden of debt that's this country faces right now. So unless we have structural reform, the outlook is pretty bleak, which is, again, why I think we've got a pretty receptive audience to start looking at this, you know, in a very open process, put everything on the table, all the different components to these programs, start tweaking them, and come up with a long-term structural solution.
There's a lot of talk on both sides of the aisle and at both the federal and state level about the notion of shared sacrifice. What does that term mean to you? Who should be prepared to sacrifice and why?
Well, now obviously it's kind of code word for let's make sure we throw tax increases in there as well. My problem with tax increases isn't ideological, it's practical. It's being realistic. I'm afraid that tax increases will be counterproductive. I think they will harm our economy, when what I said earlier is the number one component of the solution is economic growth. So the fact that President Obama and the Democrats didn't want to raise taxes last year, you know, at the end of the year, because they realized it would harm economic growth. Why would they want to raise them in the future? So again, my opposition to tax increases is just they won't work. In fact, and I'm not advocating tax decreases because we can't afford it. But in the past where we've actually decreased taxes, and people would howl about that, the fact of the matter is tax revenue grew. And that's the goal, is to get revenue growth. And I prefer to grow revenue the old-fashioned way by growing the economy. But if you take a look at Reagan, when he decreased taxes over time from 70% to 28%, our revenue went from $600 billion to $1 trillion. That's a 67% increase over a few years. Even the 2003 tax cuts, when those were enacted, total federal revenue was about $1.8 trillion. By 2008, about 5 years later, before the housing bubble hit, revenue had increased to $2.5 trillion. That was a $700 billion a year increase in revenue with tax cuts. So again, I'm a very fact-based, reality-based guy. I look at the facts and I'm going, you know, tax cuts have worked in the past. Again, I don't think we can afford them right now, but I sure don't think we can afford tax increases.
There are reports in several places that you have come out in favor of a constitutional amendment that would limit terms for Senate and House members. First, I don't believe any of those reports has actually quoted you, so I first wanted to ask if that's accurate.
Yeah. Well, Senator DeMint is proposing a bill to limit the terms of senators and congressmen. I decided to co-sponsor that primarily as a message. You know, that's not going to have a chance. I think what we need to do in order to get real term limits is kind of like a Grover Norquist effort, where people running for office sign a pledge, and we're going to have to agree on what's going to be a really reasonable amount of terms. And I think somewhere in that 12 to 18 year term for senators, for congressmen, would probably be about where you'd find something that people could agree with.
So you're not necessarily going to stick your neck out on this particular bill?
Well, again, I co-sponsored it. That's more of a messaging. I think it's something we should be talking about. I'm hoping a group does evolve that will actually start going to different candidates and say, will you take this pledge for term limits? It's a very blunt instrument. I mean, personally, I would like to think that the voters are the term limit. But what's happened over time here is, without the gerrymandering of districts, you know, we've made so many of these, particularly congressional districts, very uncompetitive. And so incumbents don't even have to worry about election, and as a result, our politics have become so polarized that, you know, I'm kind of forced to the conclusion that, you know, making term limits is about the only solution.
Are there lessons that you think can be drawn from the political climate in Wisconsin? Obviously, you are a U.S. Senator, but you must have been following what's been happening in Madison.
Kind of hard to miss, yep.
Do you think there are lessons to be drawn from how it has played out that you take with you as you move forward in Washington?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the first, I mean, two comparisons I make all the time. The reason you're seeing the state of Wisconsin having to balance its budget is because it is constitutionally required to do so. okay? Federal government isn't. The other comparison I make is you see how difficult it is to balance a $1.8 billion a year deficit for the state. The federal government's deficit is $1.65 trillion. It's almost 1,000 times worse. Okay, that's partly because there's been no constraint. There's been no constitutional requirement to ever try and balance the budget. So we can do these things for year after year after year until you hit that debt crisis. And then things would come to a grinding halt. So I mean, that's the conclusions I draw from that is how effective really the constitutional amendment within states have been in terms of disciplining states so it doesn't get so far out of control. And we need to, you know, it would have been nice if we would have put that constitutional amendment, there were 3 votes back in the 90s. They always got defeated. That was a shame, because we actually had balanced budgets back then. We wouldn't be even in this pickle if we had that constitutional restraint. So that's the lessons I draw is let's provide that hard spending cap. Spending cap. Let's do a constitutional limitation to spending and the balancing of budget.
Given the friction that has played out in Wisconsin, and given the equation you were just talking about, would you imagine the friction to be 1,000 times worse in that effort at the federal level?
Let's hope not. It's going to be hard, but I think the other lesson you learned from Wisconsin is, you know, we had a governor, we had state legislators that you know, showed courage, and they did what I believe voters expect their elected officials to do, is to make the hard choices. You know, not necessarily do the politically expedient thing, but to actually take a look at the problem and seriously address it. And that's, as a voter, that's always what I expected from, you know, my congressman, my senator, my legislators. So, you know, that happened here in Wisconsin. I think that's a very good sign.
What do you think of
For the Waukesha Freeman, I'm Troy Locke. Be sure to watch part 3.